We're joined today by Mitchell Kurek, State and Local Government Affairs Specialist with the Pennsylvania Farm Bureau. For those unfamiliar, can you explain who you represent within the Farm Bureau?
Absolutely. So I am a part of the government relations team, part of the Pennsylvania Farm Bureau. My main goal and the rest of my team's main goal is to advocate for the grassroots policies that were put in place by our members. And we take the lead role in the voicing our message at the state, federal, and regulatory levels in our government. So,
what is the significance of the ag industry in Pennsylvania's economy?
It is massively significant, and I have to give a lot of credit to our governor and our legislature. They really make it a bipartisan issue, and when you look at the data, it's pretty upfront that this is one of the main pillars of economic development in our Commonwealth. So when you think about it, there's over $500 billion in economic impact annually, and almost 600,000 jobs supported by the agricultural industry. So investments into that area are critical going forward.
How does Governor Josh Shapiro's budget proposal this year impact the ag industry?
So mainly he understood the point I just made and understands very well that targeted investments will keep our agricultural industry vibrant and competitive across the country. So specifically, he's been allocating more funding into the Agricultural Innovation Grant. So last year, he allocated $10 million and had plenty of applicants and awarded grant applications across our state. But this year, he's asking for an additional $15 million, $13 million specifically toward that grant to fund more projects across the Commonwealth, and $2 million of that specifically into the production of methane digesters on farms.
For those that aren't familiar, can you give us maybe another good example or two of what's accomplished through those ag innovation grants?
Absolutely. And our members have been sharing their stories. It's something we're advocating for heavily because it really does benefit our operations and our economy overall. When you look at some of the targeted projects, it could be anything from the methane digester that I just mentioned, all the way to expanding facilities or enhancing production to make it more efficient. So robotic dairy milkers, for instance. There's a lot of ways. They wrote the language in the grant application process very broad because there's so many different ways that you can enhance your production, and it's been very beneficial.
Last month, Governor Shapiro announced a $6 million investment into farmland preservation. Why is this important?
Yeah, and something, again, we're very supportive of. Farmland preservation, it boils down to the answer is very simple. God only made so much land, and there's only so much fertile farmland in our Commonwealth. So protecting that is extremely important because it supports local communities, our rural economy, and our Commonwealth overall. But when you look about it, or when you think about it, we have plenty of members who are 6th, 7th, 8th generation farmers. These farms have been in their families for over 100 years. So there's a heritage aspect too that's really important with preserving farmland as well.
One of Governor Josh Shapiro's proposals is to legalize recreational marijuana. If this were to be approved, how would this affect farmers in Pennsylvania?
So we haven't had too many discussions just yet with the PDA, the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. I know there are ambitions to make that very farmer-focused, and we'll have to wait and see the specific language and the details about how that's introduced, just because it's going to involve a lot of industries, a lot of departments, and a lot of oversight. So we'll be very interested to see how that develops, and we'll keep our eye on it at the Farm Bureau.
The governor is also proposing an increase in the state's minimum wage. If the cost of labor goes up, does that also impact the cost of food? Absolutely
does. When you think about it, from a market standpoint, as soon as you have to spend money on your operation in one factor, if you're not making it up in the cost of your goods, then you're either going to have to essentially you could lose some of your ability to hire laborers. You might have to go toward automation, things like that. So yes, it would be very hurtful if you increase that wage without having a market factor or market force pushing you to be able to do that essentially. Yeah.
Since January, when President Trump took office, there have been some significant national policy changes as well. I want to focus perhaps, at least initially, on immigration and get you to talk a little bit about how that may have or may in the future impact farmers in Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so a little bit out of my realm, covering specifically state issues. It's something we're monitoring very closely at the federal level, something we're advocating for, and it's really important for us to just tell the story about people who do use the programs like H-2 workers. Our focus in that aspect is just to advocate the stories, make sure that any new laws that are put in place are workable for the farmers of the Commonwealth.
In the last week or so, President Trump has also enacted 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico regarding trade. How do you foresee that impacting Pennsylvania farmers as well?
So we'll have to wait and see specifically which industries it does hit. Again, something we're going to be closely monitoring to make sure that we are utilizing every resource we can to make sure prices stay at the current levels. And
The U.S. Farm Bill was granted another extension in December. Is there anything specific that you'd like to see centered on as Congressman Thompson and the Ag Committee work to retool this Farm Bill once again? So,
yes, and the representative from Pennsylvania, as you well know, has been doing a fantastic job messaging it. The Farm Bill does expire this year, so we need to make sure that it is funding. It's extremely important funding from a commodity pricing standpoint, from their nutritional programs and overall investments that are really crucial for farmers across the country. So it's something we're going to continue advocating for sure.
Let's go back to the state issues for just a moment. A bill's reemerged in the legislature to expand Sunday hunting in Pennsylvania. What's the Farm Bureau's position on this?
Yep, so I'll give you a little history about it because it was contentious in our organization particularly. So a couple years ago, our policy development, during the process, we finally got behind the idea of Sunday hunting. And at the forefront of that was, I think there's a recognition now about the key issue that it could help address, which is crop damage mitigation in the state. So we have supported that. The Senator Laughlin, who introduced it, kept us in the conversation. He wanted to make sure that, hey, this is something that benefits you guys, because eliminating that herd, or the current deer herd across the state, not only benefits farmers who are seeing tens of thousands of dollars of economic impact from the deer damage, but also it helps food pricing at the end of the day, because the operations aren't losing as much money. So we are supportive of that bill. There are some really great things for agriculture in that bill, and we're going to be pushing to see it get passed this year.
What was the Farm Bureau's initial hesitation regarding that issue?
So historically, farmers didn't want to have to worry about another day where there could be individuals on their land, is what it really boiled down to. So within the bill, though, he addresses that concern by increasing the penalties for trespassing. It's something that, it's supposed to be a day of rest for a lot of our members, and to that point, they want to ensure that they don't have to be out there chasing off irresponsible hunters, which is extremely important to them. And we were very happy to see that portion was included in the bill.
This issue's been introduced over the last several sessions. Why do you think it's been a difficult issue to pass?
Well, I think there are several reasons for that. And to my understanding, before I joined the Farm Bureau, we were really a main part of the opposition. And I think that it wasn't necessarily passed because there were concerns from different groups about, is this going to do too much to eliminate the deer herd? And I don't think that's going to be the case at all. I think as well there are, advocates on there are advocates from a variety of different groups who now have to come together and have come together to kind of make sure the bill works for everybody, is workable for everybody. And I think that's been achieved. So we're very optimistic this time around that that'll get passed.
A moment ago, we talked a little bit about Pennsylvania Congressman Glenn Thompson, who chairs the U.S. Ag Committee. Mm-hmm. One of his top issues is trying to get whole milk back into public schools. How would this affect Pennsylvania farmers?
Oh, it'd be extremely beneficial. And at the state level, too, a similar bill was introduced to get whole milk back in Pennsylvania. This is just another avenue for our dairy producers to have another place in the market where historically they have been. So it's something very important as well.
Another issue that's been in the news quite a bit over the last several months is the avian flu. Why has this been such a significant concern this year?
So I wouldn't say personally it's any more or less concerning than it has been. So this has been going on since about 2022. We have seen cases now in Pennsylvania again in 2025. And this is a concern because of how quickly it could spread through a poultry flock. And it is extremely devastating. So we need to make sure that there's a lot of data and surveillance. And I think now, after we're starting to see some of the economic losses from HPAI, that people who are really affected are really trying to make a strong push to say, hey, we need to be doing as much as we possibly can as a state. And I would say the state is doing that.
How is the state doing that? What are they doing to help alleviate the problem?
So between educating legislators, Penn Vet's doing a tremendous job, some of their experts, on making sure legislators understand what are avenues that we could take, particularly with biosecurity, data and surveillance. They're giving them all the information they need to know. But more than that, the PDA and Governor Shapiro have allocated funding, which currently stands at $61 million for recovery of economic losses. It's the only kind in the entire country. And that money can be used toward assisting, like I said, in economic recovery, data and surveillance, testing, and trying to make sure that the flocks are restocked and back into the marketplace. And it's been a fantastic response, and they've definitely been on top of it.
Has the avian flu been responsible for the rising cost of eggs, or are there other factors at play there?
That certainly is one, and probably one of the larger ones, just because the thing about it is when a flock of birds is infected, you essentially have to cull the entire flock, which has led to about 7 million birds being lost. So that's essentially why you're starting to see those higher egg prices, yeah.
Why has there been concern about cows contracting the avian flu?
So that is a concern because across the country there have been different cases about that. Currently in PA we don't have any cases. And it's not as lethal of a disease in dairy in cows. But it is something that is concerning because it affects the yield of the amount of milk that a cow produces. So you could see then higher prices if it starts to get really widespread among cows. To that point, though, there has been now mandatory bulk testing of milk to make sure that the dairy cattle aren't contracting the disease, and so far in PA, there hasn't been any contraction. Yeah.
Are humans at risk of contracting the avian flu? And maybe if you can talk a little bit about how it's transmitted.
Absolutely. So there is a potential for that, especially obviously with the individuals that having to handle these animals day in and day out. And it's contracted by just being in the close contact by touch, I believe. I'm not an expert on it, don't get me wrong. So it's very important that the biosecurity measures are in place and that the proper gear is being worn to ensure that you aren't transmitting that disease. But it's mainly affects poultry and, as I mentioned before, cattle and dairy cows, but not too much in humans.
Back in February, Governor Shapiro signed a bill to allow Pennsylvania farm workers to become certified poultry technicians. Can you talk about how that helps in keeping a handle on the avian flu as well? Absolutely.
So that was a bill that Farm Bureau supported, and we were happy to see that this was one of the first things to get done in the state legislature. So to that point, it's extremely important, and it has been echoed for a while now, that surveillance and data collection help contain the spread because you know exactly where it is and who it could affect next. It is very complicated, though, because given that wild birds are the ones transmitting this, so their travel is much harder to kind of confine. But that bill specifically allows more people to enter the pool of individuals that can become poultry technicians, and those are the individuals that do a lot of the surveillance and data collection and testing.
What more would you like to see the state or federal government do to help assist farmers that have been impacted by the avian flu?
At the moment, they are doing a substantial amount. From the federal level, I can't say that $1 billion has been added to try to restock the marketplace from bird losses. And at the state level, they do have a substantial amount of money in that reserve funding to combat it. I think, as we continue and get a real grasp on what's the best way to combat HPAI, then we'll start to see, the specific ways that we could really focus the investments to make sure that we're combating it in the most efficient way. But right now, there are plenty of different tools and assets that are being utilized to combat it. So nothing in particular that I could say right now that isn't already being done.
How would you describe your outlook for the future of farming in Pennsylvania?
Very positive, very positive. And we have a governor and a legislature who put it as a top priority. And that's extremely exciting to see. It's not, like I said, this is a bipartisan issue, and it's fantastic to advocate for farmers because everybody has to eat at the end of the day. And with groups like the Farm Bureau and other advocacy groups that benefit agriculture, I think there is a real positive outlook. Our story is being told at every scale of government, and I think we'll see a lot of our priorities be accomplished in the near future.
What more can be done to encourage future generations of farmers?
That's a great question. And, there are programs like FFA and H2. And these groups are essentially the face of the future of agriculture. Encouraging people into this very complex, very dense field of agriculture, showing them the world and telling them the story about why this is not only a fulfilling career path is extremely important. And I think, there are plenty of programs that have existed for a long time that do a fantastic job at telling that story. And Penn State continued investments into our universities to help them grow and sustain and innovate, and showing people, there are different, you could be an engineer and you could get into agriculture because there are new tools and AI and so many different things, so many exciting things that are being done. And I think when you start telling that story specifically, all the innovation that is being done in agriculture, I think then you'll see it attracting people from a variety of fields.
Can you talk a little bit more about what kind of advancements there are in technology right now to help modernize farming practices?
Yeah, absolutely. So we mentioned crop damage mitigation before. So there are so many different ways that you can combat that, whether it be legislative reforms, like we mentioned with the Senate Bill 67, or regulatory changes to help programs to the Game Commission, but innovating technology is a really exciting way to change it. So Penn State Nittany AI has actually been developing a system that could use AI to track deer herds and target and essentially then understand where those deer herds are moving on farmland to try to track their movements, and then it would make the removal of those deer much simpler. So that's just one pretty neat tool that we've been closely working with.
Has there been anything in particular that the Farm Bureau would like to see the governor support or perhaps endorse that hasn't specifically been discussed within his budget proposal this year?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think the standard one of the biggest pushes for us would be for the Sunday hunting bill, of course. We look at various other things too, support for investments into energy, so methane digesters, we've seen a little bit about, we've seen a little bit of investment into, but allowing farmers to diversify the portfolio on the farm. So continued investments into different sectors that affect farming is incredibly important.
Mitchell Kurek, thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.